A brief introduction. Hello, reader. I am the author of this strange tale. I wanted to give you a few details right out of the gate. For how this story works, it is a little different from some of the other stories on here. Firstly, this story takes place in a D&D inspired world. Now, what does that mean? Well, for one, it means you can expect magic, monsters, demons, and devils. All sorts of spooky critters and unique rules govern the world that this story takes place in. Secondly, it means that the main character is a real D&D character with a real character sheet. What that means is that there is a set number of skills and abilities that can influence the story. In addition, I will be rolling for him. Now, you definitely do not need to know anything about D&D to understand the story. I won't be including the rolls I make for him in the story, but I assure you I will be rolling them. All you need to know before we move on is what Inspector Spector looks like and where the story takes place. Inspector Spector is a 3-foot-tall fairy with light gray skin, black hair, and purple eyes. His wings look like dragonfly wings, and when he is flying they move so fast you can barely see them. He has a house that exists simultaneously in every major realm of existence. What is a realm? Think of it like a planet. Hell, for example, is a realm. It is called the Nine Hells, and it is its own planet. Some of these are as big as universes, whereas some are as small as actual planets. Some exist parallel to ours, where everything is the same but only spirits and ghosts live there. The setting for this story is going to be on the material plane, which is basically like Earth, except magical and fantasy. Specifically, it takes place in a city known as Omni City, the melting pot for strife and crime, which only seldom has crimes that actually interest our inspector. Past that, here are a few basics. Currency is split between 4 coins: copper, silver, gold, and platinum. Copper is what most commoners get paid in, and the coins work in increments of 10. 10 copper is a silver, 10 silver is a gold, etc. A single gold coin is, on average, a year's salary for most commoners. That is everything. I hope you enjoy the story of murder, blackmail, magic, and one single boomerang. Chapter 1. A Wild Beginning. Locking one's door is one of the simplest things you can do to prevent unwanted guests, and some doors are particularly important to lock. One of these doors is the front door of the one and only Inspector Spector. You see, Mr. Spector has one house/office. Technically. He has one house in every realm with a society. The Nine Hells, the Abyss, the Feywilds, Material Plane, etc. You name it, and he has a house there. But they all lead to this one singular home/office. That is why it is so important for him to lock his door, because if he doesn't, he might have a dozen clients waiting for him from very different cultures. No one wants Danthe, the elven accountant who thinks the captain of the guard is stealing text coins, to sit in a lobby with Yog Soggoth, the knower of 1,000 truths. The inspector was just getting home from an exhausting case. 18 hours straight on the job in a hostile environment where anyone could be the culprit would normally be the craziest case in a detective's lives, but for Spector, it was Tuesday. However, it didn't change how very tired it made him. He was so tired he barely noticed that there were a few arrows still in his back. They didn't pierce the skin due to him wearing chainmail as an undershirt, but the arrows dangled loosely in his coat as a gentle reminder that he was that close to death. Slowly staggering towards one of his doors, he goes for his keys. Upon turning them in the lock, he notices how easily they turn, indicating to him that he did not lock his door on the way out. "Damn it," he mutters under his breath to no one in particular. He knows that when he opens that door, there will be a client on the other side. Specifically because he doesn't want someone to be there, it practically guarantees it. Spector put his ear up against the door, and he can hear someone muttering to themselves. Whoever it was, they seemed very nervous, and were rehearsing what they were going to say. This is excellent news, because it can make Inspector Spector look like a better detective than he is by walking in and already knowing what's happening. This is how most detectives get away with looking like they are geniuses, like that hack fraud, Sherlock Groves. Hey, my name is Anthony, and I've been framed for murder. No, that's too strong. I need to work my way up to it. Hey there, my name's Anthony, and my friends call me Tony, and my enemies call me Snitch. That's too casual. Why is speaking so hard? The man mumbled to himself. Mr. Spector rolled his eyes so hard they could have popped out. Another murder case. Right after the other one. He hasn't even finished a long rest yet. No sleep and no money is a bad place to be. Not to mention his wand of detect magic only recharges at dawn, and thus needs to be in a plane of existence with a dawn to recharge. The lack of money worried him more. The trouble is, he wasn't paid for his last case because the one who was paying him ended up going to jail for the crime he had hired Spector to investigate. He probably imagined his cunning frame job would guarantee his freedom, but alas, he forgot to account for Inspector Spector being an actually good investigator, and not a gimmick detective like he probably thought. Inspector Spector was a 3-foot-tall ferryman. Originally born in the Feywilds, he had trouble getting along with other Fey. Due to being born and conceived in the darker part, he came out with a few quirks. Gray skin and purple eyes tend to stand out amongst the elitist Feyfolk. Outcast from normal Fey society, Spector spent his time reading and studying everything he could, and eventually found love, after a sea elf was found without much memory of herself, lost and adrift in the Feywilds. It was almost the anniversary of her funeral. Swinging the door open like a villain making a dramatic entrance was the very short Inspector Spector. Normally he flies 2 feet up, so he hovers at about 5 feet tall, but after 18 hours of the most infuriating case of this week, Mr. Spector was not feeling up to it. Quick question for you, Anthony. Is this something that is time-sensitive, or can I sleep first? Spector walked over to his desk, barely having the energy to get over there. He was about waist level to the 6-foot-tall human in his lobby. Spector could care less what this 20-something had to say. His bed beckoned him from the other room. Soft and spacious, with sheets made from spider silk, he could only hope Anthony was about to tell him that he could sleep. But it was not to be. I'm sorry, sir, but it is quite time-sensitive. I've been framed for murder, and we don't have much time at all until Detective Mango arrives to arrest me. When I got here, I only had a few hours left, but without a clock, I don't know how much time has passed since I arrived. I could only have an hour left. Please, you've got to help me. Anthony fiddled with his hands, and tiny sparks of energy escaped them. Spector noticed several things immediately. Firstly, he noticed that Anthony was lying. He wasn't sure what about, though. Either it isn't time-sensitive, or he hasn't been framed for murder. There was always the possibility that it's some other third thing, but Spector couldn't for the life of him imagine what it could be given his lack of sleep. Regardless, unless he was paid at least a gold, Spector wasn't going to be hired by a liar again, 2 times in a row. The second thing he noticed was the sparkles of pure energy escaping his hands. Now this means one of 2 things in Spector's experience. Either this kid was a sorcerer, or he was being possessed. Due to the lack of his head spinning 360 degrees, or cursing at him in abyssal, it was most likely not possession. He could always throw salt at him to rule it out, but who just has a pocket of salt with them at all times? Due to lack of evidence pointing towards one or the other, Spector decided to look at the factors surrounding the burst of energy to reach his conclusion. Literally nothing was happening other than him getting a little worked up. If the magic sparks against his will, and while he gets emotional, that leads Spector to one conclusion. Few questions right out of the gate, Anthony. First things first, how long have you been a wild magic sorcerer? The look of shock on Anthony's face told Spector that he was correct. If he was more awake, he'd probably have a smug look on his face right about now, but instead he had an unemotive, blank look on his face. Anthony didn't know what to say. He probably wasn't even going to mention that he was a wild magic sorcerer until after Spector took the case to prevent scaring him off. Shuffling awkwardly in his poorly fitted shoes, he mumbled a barely audible sentence. Spector leaned in to try and hear what was being mumbled. The only thing Spector could hear, though, was the smacking of the kid's lips together as he tried to form words. "Speak up, kid. If it's as time-sensitive as you say, we hardly have time to waste on you muttering nonsense to yourself." Anthony seemed to gather up whatever muster he had and spoke with a loud voice that shook Spector's head a little. "I've known about it for about 4 years," Anthony shouted. Spector thought to himself how this kid is either one extreme or the other, either too quiet or too loud. Let's hope he's innocent, because arresting a wild magic sorcerer who doesn't even know how to control his voice, let alone his powers, would be a major pain in the ass. Second question. How much are you paying me to solve this case? Spector asked this while tactfully ignoring the stack of bills from the multi-dimensional housing committee that keeps his home from splitting into the void between the 9 realms. He probably owed them 7 gold by now. In addition, with rent being a steep 1 gold per month, it's a miracle they haven't just plunged his home into the void after 3 months. But this company doesn't exactly need the money, so maybe he's just a low priority. "I'd be paying you 10 gold, sir, my entire month's allowance." Damn rich kids and their month's salary being 10 times that of the yearly salary of an average blacksmith. But hey, rich probably means that it's going to be really easy. They typically have a begrudging butler that does these kinds of murders, so it shouldn't take too long to solve this one. Though it's a little strange how a rich kid is wearing shoes that are too big for him. "Well, hey, for 10 gold, I'll see what I can do. Half now, half later." "What did the victim die of?" Spector asked, taking off his coat and putting on an identical coat with less arrows in it. "Well, that's the thing. He died of death." It's never going to be simple, is it? Chapter 2. A Murder Most Confusing. Turning the dial on his door to Material Plane, Inspector Spector took a deep breath and let out a sigh so heavy he seemed to shrink a little afterwards. The windows outside his home flashed a million vibrant colors before landing somewhere in a dark city. The faint sounds of the city could be heard as Spector opened his front door and started walking with his client. After a few steps, he immediately walked right back to lock his door. He wasn't going to make the same mistake twice in a row. Before locking it, he threw the 5 gold that Anthony had just given him into the office, as it wasn't a good idea walking around with that kind of money. After catching back up with his client, he looked up at him and slowly mustered the strength to start flying again. His wings started to flutter slowly, then building up speed and eventually picking him up off the ground. Once he was high enough to make eye contact with his client, his wings were moving so fast you could barely see them, just a blur where you know there must be wings. Breaking the silence, he addressed the lack of information he had been given. "Anthony, I'm going to need you to elaborate just a little bit when you say they died of death. Everyone dies of death. Every single person who can die dies because death took their soul from their body. However, the Reaper only does this when the body dies of something. Even when it looks like nothing killed them, sometimes it's a heart attack, or their brain exploded because Deern tried reading their mind and put a little too much zest into it." "Who's Deern?" Anthony asked, missing the point entirely. "Discount god of the mind flayers. Don't worry about it, just tell me more about how they died, or who died, or really any information at all." "The mind flayers are real?" he said with a very surprised face. Spector took note of what surprise looked like on his face, in case it came in handy later. He gave him a glare, telling him to get on with it. "Okay," Anthony continued. "Well, here's the basic information. As you figured out, I am a wild magic sorcerer. I can't really control my powers, and when I get worked up, weird things happen. Normally, I can loosely predict what happens, but when I'm angry, I black out. I don't know what happens when I black out, but it follows a pretty common theme. Extreme violence. Me and my older brother Mark got into an argument. He started talking about throwing me into therapy or something to help with my trauma and how that'll help me control my abilities, but he doesn't understand how my magic freaking works. As he spoke, the leaves of a tree he was walking underneath turned to ash. Spector flew away, slowly maintaining his forward momentum, but now staying a safe 2 feet away. Anyways, I blacked out, and when I woke up, he was dead. But he wasn't, like, skinned or a bloody pulp or anything like that. He just died. I knew that I didn't do it because when I lose control, people don't often resemble themselves afterwards. Spector began to deeply regret taking this job. But due to him already having accepted half the payment for it, he didn't want to make Anthony any angrier by quitting. Spector was 100% sure that he had killed his brother, as when he was telling the part about blacking out, he did the same thing he did when he was trying to tell Spector that he was innocent. He looked down and spoke slightly quieter for just a moment. A sign of guilt, or an obvious tell, either way, he was hiding something. Considering that it happened twice, and both times was speaking about the murder, it cannot be a coincidence. Secondly, just him recalling the argument made him so angry, a burst of whatever that was disintegrated the leaves around him. Anthony may not be aware of it, but he is holding Spector hostage with his rage and uncontrolled magic. Though seeing what he did to those leaves, it is a wonder his brother didn't turn into precipitation after being hit with this magic. So maybe there was some merit to this mystery. Regardless, it was time to play along and act as if he wasn't considering turning in Anthony before even looking into the case. After a moment of walking for Anthony and flying for Spector, Spector realized he hadn't responded. Instead of responding to what had been said, however, he broke the silence a different way. "Where are we going, by the way? Do you live nearby, or are we just walking aimlessly for lack of better things to do?" "Oh, I live nearby. My family owns every armor and clothing shop in town except for Spencer's, so we have to live locally." A terrible realization dawned upon Spector. Flashes of his deceased wife, memories of a betrayal, and whispers of the dead. He had been to the house they were going to, and he swore he would not go back. Despite it having been 70 years, and most everyone involved in the tragedy of that day being long dead, Spector lives on and carries the memories of that damned house. "Anthony, what is your last name?" Spector asked, knowing the answer and dreading hearing that damned 5-letter word. "Oh, my last name is Briar. Why do you ask?" Spector certainly wasn't going to admit to what he did, but he is starting to understand that dark magic and violence seem to run in this family. Hopefully this time he won't have to kill anyone. At least this time he doesn't have anyone to lose. Chapter 3. The Scenic Scene of Crime. About a mile away from the border of the town lies the Briar Mansion. Built over 400 years ago, it has needed several remodels to keep the parts of the building from aging away. But they have tried to keep the spirit of the original design throughout all the remodels. Spector looked at the new paint job and noticed it was a shade brighter than the last time he was here. Perhaps by painting it a lighter brown, they thought they could bring some brightness and joy into this house. Unfortunately, no amount of paint or flower gardens could get rid of the stench of history that permeates from the halls of this damned mansion. Despite his bubbling contempt for this job, Spector has now decided to make sure the culprit actually gets arrested this time. No amount of strings pulled from the briars will free them from the hands of justice, and this time Spector will try his best to not kill anyone. He is going to investigate every goddamn drop of water in this mansion until there is irrefutable evidence that even the glory-obsessed Sherlock Groves couldn't refute. The metal gate in front of the long hallway to the front door was enchanted. Only a member of the family could get it to open. Though the enchantment was not needed to keep Spector out, the damn thing was made of iron, and Spector definitely didn't have the energy to fly over a 15-foot high gate. Anthony placed his hand around a metal bar of the gate, and a loud thunk could be heard from the inside mechanisms. The gate opened, and the walkway towards the front door illuminated like it was bioluminescent. All this fancy magic made Spector sick, knowing how much it must have cost. As they approached the front door, Spector could feel something lightly pulling on him, telling him not to go. He doesn't get this feeling very often, but when he does, it was usually correct. Some spirit was looking out for him, desperately wanting him to stay away from danger. But unfortunately for the spirit, the dangerous jobs are the ones that pay the bills, and he was really behind on bills. He did start to feel the draw of his bed once again, though. He never remembers his dreams, but he remembers enjoying them. The front door opened before either of them could reach for it. A face Spector last saw when it was 10 years old was looking back at him, now belonging to a furious 80-year-old woman. "Anthony, my darling boy, when I asked for you to go get a detective, I was referring to any of the ones we employ, not this A slur started to form in her mouth. She swallowed it and landed on less harsh words. "I didn't mean this man. This is the one inspector in all the 9 realms I don't want you associating with." "Well, very sorry to inform you, Miss Briar, but I've already been hired. Fey magic has bound me to complete this task, just as it has bound Anthony here to let me solve it. Turning me away would only lead to terrible things, I'm afraid." Most non-Fey people don't understand how Fey magic works. So long as you sound ominous, 9 times out of 10 they will believe you. Her look of fury turned into a look of exhausted conceit. "You always get your way, don't you, Inspector?" she said while moving out of the way. Says the person who just admitted to having detectives on their payroll, and has gotten away with tax evasion, extortion, blackmail, and kidnapping so frequently that I could fill several books with all the crimes you've committed and gotten away with from just the last 5 years alone. Don't attempt to get in my way, Miss Briar. Once I'm on a case, I will solve it. Spector makes direct eye contact with her in an attempt to intimidate her into leaving him alone. She matched his energy with a glare and opened her mouth to speak. For a moment, it looked like the first word out of her mouth was going to be another slur for the Fey folk, but instead she walked out, shouting behind her, "Dennis, we have a detective here. Show him to the crime scene, will you?" She turned to Inspector Spector, and with a voice as cold as the wind of a winter night, "If you lay a single hand on him, Inspector, you won't live to see how easily I can get away with murder." A chill went down his spine. That had the familiarity that only a Briar family death threat could have. Turning away from the cold hand of death known as Margaret Briar, Inspector Spector looked at Anthony Briar and put on his best customer service voice. "So, what room is the crime scene in?" "In the multi-dimensional observation deck," Anthony said, with the kind of casual cadence that told Spector he had no idea how insane it was to have something like that in a house. Entire colleges have to apply for years to get the funding Entire colleges have to apply for years to get the funding to view a single alternate realm. However, the Briars have so much money, they just have a room that can view any and all realms. The 9 realms all exist in a sort of ball, all wildly different sizes, but regardless all clumped together. There are several other planes of existence, but those are classified differently as they don't meet the size criteria to be a realm according to the government. The 9 realms are as followed, listed in order of top to bottom. Mount Celestia, the astral plane, the Feywilds, the material plane, the ethereal plane, the elemental tundra, the 9 hells, Pandemonium, and the abyss. The Feywilds and the ethereal plane, both sandwiching either side of the material plane, sometimes lead to people accidentally ending up in the Feywilds. Some spells even allow you to seamlessly travel to the ethereal plane. The magical energy and knowledge required to view all of these realms, regardless of distance, is so hard to fathom that Inspector Spector didn't bother trying. Bring me to the crime scene before your grandmother kills me. Oh, that was my mom, actually. Spector took a minute to shake out of his 1,000-yard stare and settled into eyebrow-raising confusion. He decided to not think about what this 80-year-old woman was getting up to and moved on without questioning it. He followed Anthony through the house, a mansion so big to anyone else it would be a labyrinth. Spector looked around and saw the new rooms and the new carpet. He was glad for every difference in the house. The less it resembled the house from 70 years ago, the more he could pretend he was elsewhere. After 10 minutes of walking upstairs and down hallways, they finally arrived at the multi-dimensional observation deck. The room was stunning. A 20-foot diameter dome with glass panels that viewed whatever plane of existence you could want to see. It was presently viewing the astral plane, and Spector marveled at the wonders of space. He lost himself for a moment, watching the galaxy turn and twist, seeing all the different lights shoot across the sky. He had not realized that he had been standing there for several minutes before Anthony said something to someone other than Spector. "Oh, sorry, Dennis. I know Mom asked you to take him here, but he asked me before you got here, and I didn't want to keep him waiting." Spector snapped out of his trance and turned to look at who Anthony was speaking to, and whomst he saw was a wall of a man. A 7-foot-tall orc with long braided hair forming into a ponytail, his bulging muscles straining his poorly fitted suit, his yellow eyes fitting squarely on Inspector Spector. A butler that large must be here for more reasons than just to direct Spector here. He is here to make sure nothing happens. The muscle of the family. Spitting image of his father, whom Spector had not seen since the incident. Feeling an overwhelming need to prove himself all of a sudden, Spector began to investigate the crime he was brought here to solve. Oh, this boy died of a lot more than death. Nothing short of a true resurrection would bring this kid back to life, but the Briar's money doesn't work on the clerics powerful enough to know it. Spector put on his gloves to investigate more closely. They lit up with a dim blue aura, protecting him from any curses or hexes placed on the body. Bruising around the neck shows strangulation occurred at some point, but it doesn't look like the cause of death. His veins were a deep black all throughout the body, seeming to be sourced from the chest. Carefully removing the shirt to look underneath, Spector saw the point of impact, a wicked blast right in the chest. It also looks like the impact morphed the body slightly. Advanced decay surrounding the impact zone, and it seems to be bulging slightly. Spector had a hunch he didn't really like, but he had no way to prove it until dawn. In addition, Mark was wearing shoes that were too small for him. They didn't fit all the way, and it looked like they were haphazardly put on. Very strange that Mark would have a pair of shoes that didn't fit as well, though it looks like Anthony was wearing a pair that would fit Mark perfectly. It was all starting to make sense. Hey, Anthony, you promised not to harm me while I'm here, right? Of course, I wouldn't dream of it. A small and imperceptible chain wrapped around Anthony's heart. Should he try to harm Spector, the chain will tighten and prevent him from being able to move. If he does manage to harm Spector, the chain will crush his heart. Spector didn't like using fey magic against people so young, but this was a special circumstance. Good, because I was going to suggest you look into therapy. Chapter 4. A reasonably reasonable request. 8 blocks down the road, and a few minutes earlier, Margaret Breyer walked into the office of the chief detective of Omni City. What Detective Mango lacked in a normal name, he made up for with his burning obsession to be the best. Coming from a family of halflings, he always had to try twice as hard to make an impression, as those under 4 foot are typically overlooked, both literally and figuratively. He finished top of his class and even took extra training. He is well versed in sensitivity training, hand-to-hand combat, track and field, parkour, knife throwing, lockpicking, and a dozen other things that might come in handy in worst-case scenarios. He currently holds the record for the 6-second dash, and managed to dash through it, moving an incredible 90 feet. His speed, however, didn't help him in Omni City. He is being blackmailed by the Briars, and is desperately trying to get out of it. 8 weeks ago, he was looking into their crimes when he received an envelope that contained several things. A drawing of a mango tree on fire. Below it was his home address, the names of his kids and their mothers, with a note that said, "Protect the little mangoes, detective. Looking into the Briars made the Briars look into you. Proceed as you wish, dear detective." Margaret Breyer was used to dealing with the previous chief detective. He was quite good at following orders. Mango, however, has been incredibly resistant, not seeming to understand the position he is in. She has just resorted to taking care of things herself or contacting one of the people below Mango that is under her thumb. But this was an emergency. Spector was a problem. He was an omen of things to come, and she was not going to lose another family member to that damned pixie, or whatever he was. Walking into Mango's office with a slow but deliberate movement, she sat down at his desk, waiting for him to stop pretending as if he was busy. He wasted 5 minutes of her time going through papers and filing them correctly with slow and precise movements. A smile formed across his face because he knew that Anthony only had an hour to prove himself innocent before not even Margaret Breyer and all her money could stop him from throwing that guilty little turd into jail. After the longest 5 minutes in either of their lives, Mango looked up and feigned surprise. He spoke in a flat, monotone voice to drive home his disdain. "Oh. Heavens to Betsy. I didn't notice you come in. I sure hope I didn't keep you waiting." Miss Breyer held within her more contempt than most people experience in their entire lives. But despite her seething hatred for this borderline useless man, it was but a drop in the water for the ocean of hatred she had for Spector. "Mango, I need you to do something for me. In return, I will be willing to leave you alone for 6 months. Miss Breyer, I seem to recall you asking me to give you 12 hours to prove the innocence of your boy. If you've come to ask for an extension, then I'm afraid this isn't going to work." "The problem isn't the time. It's who my fool of a child hired to clear his name." "What, did he hire Sherlock Groves or something?" Mango laughed to himself, picturing the herring-gone rabbit man trying to solve a crime while avoiding becoming stew for this family of psychopaths. "Inspector Spector is in my home again for the first time in decades, and I am worried my boy will soon be dead. Spector does not have a good track record in my home." Hearing the name of Spector, Mango's face dropped with a smile. He had his own issues with Spector, but respected the hell out of him. However, he knew for a fact that Spector detested the Briars, so this case must be much less cut and dry than Mango thought. Spector is like a goddamn omen. No case he is ever on is normal. He must be desperate for money to take a case from the Briars, given his history with them. Margaret hates him because Spector killed his own wife in the Briar mansion when she was 10. Young Margaret ran to get help from the butler, but he was very busy and didn't really believe the little girl. She ran to her grandfather only to see Spector had killed him too. He turned to the young girl, covered in the blood of his wife and her grandfather, and all he said was, "I know this looks bad, but your grandfather deserved this." She was never told the full story. She believes the police and court ruling him as innocent was a total sham, and detested the Omni City police ever since then. She feels no pity covering up her crimes, since she believes they covered up the crime of Inspector Spector, the four-winged demon disguised as a fae. Mango knew the true story, but was worried Margaret would snap if she read anything in the file Mango had under his desk. But given her threats to kill his family, he decided to leverage this against her. "So did you not tell your precious darling boy about what happened to his grandfather? Because if you didn't, then this is entirely your fault." All of a sudden, he realized that after the weeks of threats and troubles the Briars have thrown on him, this could be the perfect revenge. "Tell you what, Miss Briar, I will give you an extension. You and your investigator will get an extra hour. So in 2 hours, I will arrive to arrest whoever has been elected the culprit by Inspector Spector." "No!" Margaret shouted with so much emotion that her voice was shaky for the rest of the conversation. "Please, no, Mr. Mango. I am so worried about my boy. He isn't right. I think he really needs help. Once this blew over, I was going to send him to Agatha's home for troubled youths, see if she could maybe help, but with that damned specter of ill omen at our door, I just want my boy to live. I've come here to ask you to arrest him." Shock slowly transformed into concern when he realized that the woman he had feared was asking him for help. Things must be much worse than he thought when she was begging for her son to be arrested. Just 11 hours ago, she threatened to skin Mango's children if he doesn't give her at least 12 hours to prove her son's innocence. Now, here she is, begging for him to be arrested, just an hour before the deadline. Mango pulled out what looked like a black watch with blood flowing through it instead of clockwork. He opened it, and on the watch face, just behind the glass, it showed a short phrase that changed depending on the circumstances. Right now, it said, "Death on the horizon." Mango stood up, grabbed his glasses and his silver throwing knives. He hesitated to grab his iron knife, in case things got hairy with Spector, but he decided to trust that Spector wouldn't be unreasonable. "Let's go,"